Well, we're starting, and I would like to welcome everyone to our second meeting of the year. I am just here as a formality to welcome you all, and I'm going to turn this over to Marty Stevens, who has lined up our program for this evening. Marty, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Georgia. I appreciate all of us being here tonight and participating in this very vital issue on Indigenous peoples. It's gratifying to know of your interest in Indigenous issues, and especially as November is Native American Heritage Month. So, in getting started, here's a little background about this program. I suggested this program to our branch board because of the studying I've been doing the past 2 years. This study started when I requested a faith-based organization to consider adopting a land acknowledgement statement. And as a result, wouldn't you know it, a task force was formed. Isn't that what we often do? Well, the members of this task force, including me, we're keen on learning about issues through webinars, social media, in-person connections, and reading. To note that there was an abundance of resources found is an understatement. Many informative reads were found, and should you be interested, contact me via email, and I will be happy to send you my reading list. And it's very possible that you have done some great reading in this subject too. So you're welcome to recommend books on this issue in the chat box during
And
this.
actually, Marty, if you would send me a list, I can post with the YouTube video. When I do that, that would be great.
Oh, I will be happy to do that, Nancy.
Thank you.
So in promoting this program, several issues were mentioned, such as missing and murdered Indigenous women, addiction, education, sexual abuse and assault, and mental health. And while becoming better informed about these issues, I was moved to wonder, so what? What's happening now? What is making a difference? And who is making a difference? My initial searches found that there is an incredible work being done around these issues of Indigenous peoples in the federal, state, county, and municipal arenas, in policymaking, in access to education, and nonprofit organizations' missions. I reached out to Commissioner Lori Stegman, a Multnomah County Commissioner and an AAUW Oregon Online Branch member. Lori put me in touch with Anna Allen, Tribal Affairs Advisor in the county's Government Relations Department. Anna is here tonight to share with us her story, her role, and the answer to the so what question. That is, Anna is an experienced policy strategist with a background in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, community engagement, and tribal relations. So, Anna, welcome. We're delighted you're with us. Would you please share with us from the beginning, at least? We're going to try to put this in two parts, but so the first part, who you are, your journey to your present role as Tribal Affairs Advisor for Multnomah County. So as I mentioned, who you are and your journey to your present role. Anna?
Sure. Happy Native American Heritage Month, everybody. Again, I'm Anna Allen, and I'm the Tribal Affairs Advisor at Multnomah County in Portland. Currently reside, though, in Troutdale, Oregon. And so a little bit about me and my journey to this position. I've been in this role now since January of last year, but I've been at Multnomah County for quite some time. So I'm a member of the Shoshone-Bannock tribe from Fort Hall, Idaho. That's Fort Bridger Treaty Territory in Southeast Idaho in Snake Country. And I was born off the reservation, but my family moved home to the reservation for several years as a young child, and I began school there. And I think, my mom quickly realized that she was really, I think, struggling with the pull of staying home on the reservation and that's often encouraged by Native communities, and the realization that there wasn't a lot of opportunity there, I think, for herself or her kids. She went to Washington State University, as did my father. That's where they met. And he is also Native and French Canadian and Irish. And so when they met, they ended up having kiddos, and I am one of now four. Or five. I'm the only girl. I have four brothers, and I'm the middle child. But we moved home to the reservation, and after several years, I think my mom quickly realized that there weren't going to be a lot of opportunities, even though our reservation is closely located to larger cities like Pocatello or Chubbuck or other areas in Southeast Idaho, also not too far from Salt Lake City, Utah. However, I think she realized I need my kids to grow up off the reservation, I think. And so we moved back to the Pacific Northwest and to the Vancouver, Portland area. And when my parents became divorced, I think my mother she really struggled and became incarcerated. My brothers and I were in and out of foster care for a while, and ended up, when she came out of being incarcerated, she found a local community, and she went through sobriety treatment here in Portland through NARA. And that really, I think, gave her a stronger connection, which is what I think she was missing, to her culture and to her community. So after experiencing houselessness for so long, my brothers and I, all of us, we kind of grew apart. We became very estranged. We all just kind of went on our own paths. And her coming out of incarceration and really looking towards a new path for herself and her family, and really leaning into healing, brought us all back together. So I was living in Central Oregon at the time. And I decided, my mom had been released, and she reached out to me. She was in transitional housing. She asked me to come back to Portland. And I was houseless at the time, living in Central Oregon. And so I believe I was about 15 years old, and I said, yes, I'll come back. So I just remember packing what I could in a bag and getting on what is now called the Breeze. It's like a bus going between Central Oregon and here, landed in Portland and took public transportation to where she said she was. And that was the first time I had seen her in a very long time. And, my brothers as well. And we all just kind of came back together. And it was really powerful in that transitional housing moment, because it was culturally specific, I think, is really what brought her off of that recidivism cycle that we often see with many people who struggle with addiction and who are often incarcerated. So that kind of started the journey. And, at that time I was a high school dropout. I loved school too. And so that was a really interesting thing that had happened. I'll never forget the day I went to school after my mom had been arrested. And I remember thinking, like, why am I sitting here? What am I going to do where do I go after school? What happens now? And the answer was nothing at that point, because nobody came, nothing ever happened. My mother was incarcerated, and my brothers and I just dispersed. And so it was, I think when people often talk about like gaps in the system or falling through the cracks, I think that's kind of a textbook example of what that statement really means. But was really excited to re-engage in that family unit and really kind of develop those relationships and that trust. So from there, and that was all due to culturally specific services happening here in Portland and Multnomah County in the Portland metro area. And then after that, we got involved in services. My mother started working at the Native American Youth and Family Center, and they have such strong wraparound services. They're a nonprofit organization. They asked, do you want to bring your daughter in to support around the fact that, if she wants a GED or if she wants to re-engage in school. And so I got my GED through programming through NAIA. And again, I loved school, so I didn't even have to really study hard. I just knew all the stuff because I love learning. It's very important to me. It's also important to tribal communities. Mentorship, education, learning, growing, all of those things are very, very deeply rooted in our values and who we are as tribal people. And so started my mom said, well, they helped you get your GED. Now you have to give back to your community. And so I remember like folding t-shirts early on, just with her. And I would go sit with her in the afternoons, and I would fold t-shirts as she would work the front desk. And she really started engaging more and more and became a pillar of the community. She passed away in 2018, but her legacy definitely lives on. I was just emailing with somebody earlier today who was like, I knew your mom and she served on all these committees. And so that's something that was instilled in me also when we all came back together as a family. And that's really what fueled me to start working. And that idea, my mom used to say, if you just try to impact the people in your direct vicinity, you will unintentionally have a huge impact on a much larger population and a much larger community. So I really took that seriously. And she was also always bringing me to everything. I went to everything with her, and we really started to rebuild our relationship as a family, through NEA, through NARA, through community, through powwows, through culture and community. And that's what led me to apply for my first job as a youth advocate at the Native American Youth and Family Center. And I worked there. And then I realized there was a huge funding gap in what I wanted to provide for the youth that were on my caseload. And I couldn't provide some of those things due to funding gaps. And my mind works in a way where I'm just very curious, like, why are there funding gaps? Who's funding this? Where does the funding come from? And that's what led me to Multnomah County, because Multnomah County was largely funding the programs that in the buckets of money that I was accessing while trying to serve these Native youth throughout Southwest Washington and Oregon. And so one day, the chair of Multnomah County, Deborah Kafori at the time, she called me and said, your name has come up several times, and I would like to talk with you about being a policy advisor on my team. And this is when she just become chair of Multnomah County. And so I'll never forget walking also into Multnomah County, the building, I'm in it right now, in like basketball shorts and a t-shirt, because we were running a youth camp and I was one of the teachers at the youth camp. And so I was like, I thought it was just a casual meeting. I didn't really know who the chair was. So I just came and I walked in and I was like, oh, I'm underdressed. But I, had a conversation with her and she was like, and then she found out in the moment who my mom was. And she was like, oh, I know your mom. And so it just started this relationship and this conversation. And I said, I don't think I'm your person. I have not worked in policy. I'm a community person. I'm going to work with youth and families. And I want to work in the Native community. And she said, well, that's what we need. We don't need policy wonks at this time. We need community people. And so I started in the chair's office in July of 2015 at Multnomah County, and worked there for 7 years before transitioning over to Central Oregon. I was recruited by Central Oregon, by the city of Bend, to be their first equity and inclusion director for the city in October of 2021. And I did that for about a year, and I could not stand how racist Central Oregon was. And there was really no space also, I think, for Indian people. Like there's a NEA and a NARA and those community spaces. That's not established in Central Oregon. And I really felt like I was drowning. And so I'll never forget that feeling. And I was living in Redmond at the time because I couldn't afford to live in Bend. And I had just moved with my 6-month-old. And so I was like really having a hard time without that community connection. And so Deborah Kafori called me one day and asked me to come back to Multnomah County. And she said, you can work remote. And I said, Deborah, I hate it here. I want to come back anyways. And so she said, come on back. And I came back to Multnomah County, and I was her senior project manager and the interim director of the Office of Community Involvement at Multnomah County. And then from there, I applied for the Tribal Affairs advisor position, which is actually a position that I asked Deborah to include in the budget because other jurisdictions have them. And Multnomah County is actually pretty late to this work in terms of having an established position. So she put it in the budget, and that was right before I moved away. So I had no intention of being in the role. I advised on, here are the tribes I think you should engage. Here are the contacts. I'm happy to reach out to them. Here's who I think you need to chat with. And then come to find out, it had been vacant for a while. They couldn't find anybody that was the right fit. And I said, man, it looks like I've just created a position for myself and I don't like that. And they, really were like, no, we need somebody in this role that understands Multnomah County and these unique issues. And so I started in the office in January of last year.
Wow, takes my breath away.
A lot.
Yeah, that's incredible. Anna, thank you for sharing so much with us. I'm glad you live in Troutdale because I live in Gresham, and us East County people really need different kinds of support than the more urban area or say the downtown core area of Portland, and even on the west side. At any rate, what a beautiful story. I was noticing you mentioned community, how important it is for you, and that you have experience with NAYA, N-A-Y-A, and NARA, N-A-R-A. In my research, I was noticing so many organizations in addition to those, such as Portland State has an Institute for Tribal Government. And of course, I think most of us know the federal level Bureau of Indian Affairs. And then I noticed the U.S. Department of Agriculture has tribal relations. The city of Portland has government, and their government relations department has tribal relations. And it goes on and on and on. And each city, like Eugene, has an intergovernment tribal relations. Many of I noticed some of the city's government structures are connected with universities. Again, there's a lot out there, and you may be living and breathing this every day, but it was news to me as I was researching. The other thing I noticed, I think maybe the rest of us noticed this too. You mentioned in working with Indigenous people and in the culture, and you found it with your mom, what a wise person she was, how important mentorship is, and learning and growing. And I was listening to you mention that, and I was thinking, this is AAUW. This is what we do. This is a mission fit like no other. And I think the rest of my colleagues here on this call probably noticed that too. So let's go to the scope of your work, what the county is expecting of your position, and what you're doing now via policy or projects or the like. Could you share that with us, please?
Sure. So my position is housed within the Office of Government Relations at Multnomah County. It's a pretty lean team. There's 6 positions total. There's only 4 of us right now. We're hiring for a couple roles. I'm the only tribal specific person. And, we work with electeds and community leaders, internal and external partners, community-based organizations, and a lot of electeds to really further the mission of Multnomah County while considering the goals and priorities of tribal governments, of other local agencies, of community partners, especially culturally specific community partners. And, we really, this is a new position for Multnomah County. It was in, I think, the 2022 budget. And then I only came on in January of 2023. So there was a little bit of a gap there, but I think it was just spoke to the intentionality that the county was trying to go through with engaging tribal governments. And so my role has really 3 core functions. So I am, and it's very specific at this point, but we adjust accordingly. But right now I would say I'm about 60% tribal consultation, so working directly with tribal governments, those sovereign nations that are separate from the United States, but they are also, they're I consider them, and many people refer to them as foreign domestic countries within the United States. So I work directly not only with Oregon's 9 tribes, but also tribal governments in Idaho and Washington as well, who have historical ties to these lands, because tribes do not see the state lines the same as post-contact. And so really, it's been a lot of trying to work internally for folks to understand, why are we working with the Yakama Nation? They're up in Washington. I'm like, yeah, but they have treaty rights here. We have to acknowledge that and really work toward, doing our part in acknowledging and uplifting that and tribal sovereignty. So 60% is really just government to government work. 20% is internal consulting. So I work within our departments on a number of things. And we can I'll talk a little bit about some of the main projects that I'm working on after I talk about the 3 buckets. And I would say that that's 20% of my time is really spent providing like subject matter expertise within county departments on any given issue that they bring to me. And also that means if I'm working with tribal governments and they identify an issue that is specific to county services, or there's an intersection within county services, say it's land use, public health, anything, I will bring that internally and work with that department and consult them in that process as well. And the other 20% is working with community-based organizations, so off-reservation, urban Native organizations like NARA, Native Wellness Institute, and others. And I think an important thing to also note is under that tribal consultation, which is the bulk of my job, there's also not just tribal governments, but there's intertribal organizations that exist too. The Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians is a really good example, as well as the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. And all of those have also federal implications, state implications. You're talking about tribes that have co-management agreements. You mentioned the U.S. Department of Agriculture and their tribal network. It's also engaging with them as well. So it's not just tribal governments, it's all of the governments. And so I'm grateful that my boss has an understanding. His name is Justin Black. He's our Director of Government Affairs or Government Relations here at the county, and has been for many years. But he has a really strong understanding that my portfolio of work encompasses all the things that our lobbyists do, state, other like city of Wood Village. I'm working with them right now. City of Gresham, City of Portland, Metro, the Port, all of these all of these governmental agencies. I also have to work with, but there's an additional set of, say, a dozen governments that I have to work with or more. And so I really appreciate that there's an understanding of that. It's not just a lobbyist position. It's very unique. And you have to work also a lot with those urban-based organizations as well. So some of the things that I'm currently working on, and actually we're going to send out a press release in the morning for one of the projects that I really am excited about, but has also caused a lot of challenges within non-Native communities who, I think as a government agency, you always are going to have folks that agree with you and don't, and you have to stand within your values and move forward on your intention behind the policy decision. And so we're renaming what is currently known as the Sauvie Island Bridge, because Sauvie Island actually has a very significant cultural it's culturally significant to tribal communities, and that includes Grand Ronde, that includes the Umatilla Indian tribe, which many people think, why would they be involved? They're way out in Eastern Oregon. They have historical ties here and treaty rights. Yakama Nation as well, Cowlitz, Siletz. This region was a huge trade network, especially with the confluence of the Columbia and Willamette rivers. And so there was even a trade language established that people know as Chinakwawa. And that's a trade language that all the tribes spoke to be able to come here and engage in commerce. So that island is very significant. There were 15 villages on that island. And when contact happened, new diseases were introduced, intentionally or unintentionally. And about 90% of the population from the island perished with that. And the remaining remaining folks in those villages were dispersed largely to 2 tribes, but also I would say 3 tribes in Oregon and Washington. And so there's a huge history and cultural significance there. And the county owns and operates that bridge. And so it was elevated as a recommendation through an advisory committee that we have. A farmer from the island who is also native had elevated that recommendation through the committee that he's on. The full committee supported it, and the Board of County Commissioners adopted that last year in November during Native American Heritage Month, and will actually be voting on the new name for that bridge in a couple of weeks on November 30th. And so I'm very excited about that, to have led that process. And it really was the first consultation process that Multnomah County has engaged in with tribal governments. And consultation is very different from community engagement, right? So that was our first process that we had ever engaged in. We engaged 6 different tribes and asked them to participate in the process, whether that be an elected official or to appoint a designee to a bridge renaming council. And 3 of those tribes decided that they had capacity and a desire to engage in that process, and they appointed somebody to participate. So I'm really excited that's an example of a project, and the intention or the root of that issue is really about re-indigenizing our waterways and really trying to clean up our rivers, really trying to bring attention to communities who have always been here. And so, we see memorials, we see things named after many people, many leaders, many communities. It's around here, it's pretty scarce sometimes to see really a monument or something truly named after or have been named in partnership with tribal governments. So that's the first time I've seen the county, and I've been here, off and on for over 8 years. It's the first time I've seen the county really truly empower tribal governments and cede power and say, we're not that subject matter experts in this moment. We're going to say we want to rename it, and we're going to ask tribal governments to tell us what it should be, and we're just going to adopt it. And I think that's really powerful as a first step to really show that partnership, that engagement in the land back effort, that engagement in recognition and re-indigenizing. And I'm excited to have, there are many Native people who still live on the island and they get to cross that bridge and see their community and themselves reflected there and recognized there and honored there. And I think that's really important. That's also just a huge value of the Native community. So I think that's an example of what I'm currently working on. And other things are really related to like public health, especially working with the Siletz tribe to establish a referral process within our public health department, specifically our behavioral health department. And we currently don't collect appropriate or accurate data when it comes. We don't ask folks, are you an enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe? And if we did, well, that individual who is going through SUDS programs, who's going through any sort of sobriety, anything that we provide, that opens up a lot of buckets of federal funding to be able to support them, right? So changing how we do intake and referral processes to work in close partnership with tribal governments who do receive that federal funding for any member of a federally recognized tribe. If we're changing our practices internally of data, of collecting data and those intake processes, then we're able to identify the individuals who need culturally specific and culturally responsive services, and who might actually have access through a tribal government to additional services that we don't. And then getting in touch with that tribal government. So at this point, we're kind of piloting the process with Siletz to say, hey, we've identified somebody who is really seeking behavioral health services. We know we as a local government are not the appropriate folks to provide those services, but we can supplement with funding. Can we shepherd them over to you and provide that warm handoff? And then we can supplement anything if they need to go out to actual Siletz in Siletz, Oregon to ceremony or powwow for those healing elements that come along with behavioral health services that the federal government doesn't really fund, and maybe we're able to fund those elements. And so that's a partnership that I'm really excited about. And I think will be kind of locked in or really active within the next several months. Those are a couple examples of some things that I'm working on right now.
Again, wow. we will have a Q&A just shortly. Thank you so much, Anna, for so much information. I was wondering if you have, as you were speaking, I was noticing you were saying we do this and we do this. I would anticipate in the internal consulting, you actually have people coming to you. And is that even an issue? Are enough people aware, enough people out there aware enough to connect with you? Or is that something we need more of?
It's a great question. You know, I am one person, and so it is challenging at times. I will say, you know, I've was really intentional coming into this position that in any work that I do, whether it had been DEI work with the city of Bend or my policy work with Chair Kafori, or in this role, I utilize a hub and spoke model because I want to, for me, systemic change over performative change is critical. And I don't, if I were to go on familial leave, I have responsibilities as the sole. I am the matriarch of our family. Once my mother passed away, the women in often many tribal communities, women hold all the decision making, the power. We are the decision makers for the family. We decide all the things. And when my mom passed, I didn't understand what that meant. And I was also under 30 at the time. And so I was like, and I was going to school full time at Portland State University under the Gates Millennium Scholarship. I was working full time for a politician for the largest county in Oregon. And I was taking care of my mom full time. And then when she passed and all those ceremonies had to come with that, it's a year-long process. And my brothers just kind of all turned to me like, what do we do now? And I was like, what are you looking at me for? And they're like, it's you. And so I'll never, you know, it's like, that's something now that I take very seriously, being the matriarch of our family, because that's how my tribe operates. The women decide, the women hold the power. And that was really something coming into this that I wanted to be aware of like, whoa, I didn't realize like what happens to me. I need to make sure my brothers are okay and they understand how to carry on our culture. They understand our language. They understand who we are related to where. And so, you know, that was really, especially living off the reservation, that was a really critical moment for me. And that's kind of triggered something in me of, I'm not going to move forward doing this work without bringing other people along with me, because if I have to go on leave, if I have to engage, if leave Multnomah County, if I move away, if something happens, I need this work to continue, because otherwise that's continued acts of erasure. And so knowledge hoarding and all of those things, those are also continuous acts of erasure. And so I want our culture to live on and survive beyond the termination era, beyond those federal Indian policies that were implemented to really remove the Indian from the man, is really how they phrased that. That was really important to me. So I'm bringing people along with me. I'm educating folks. I'm sending them to trainings. I'm asking them to engage in discussion with me, even when it's difficult, because I need them to understand, so that if I'm out of the office, the work continues. And that, I think, really speaks to systemic change versus having a position that is performative, which is, hey, will you review my land acknowledgement language? Will you, I think there's like the kind of litany of things that come along with a position like this that sometimes can feel more performative. Hey, we're going to do a proclamation for Native American Heritage Month. Will you speak? It's really kind of propping up the Indians at those times. Those are the things that I shy away from, because I'm really more interested in institutional policy change. And it is difficult to have so many people come to me, but I also, there's so many Native people throughout Multnomah County and within other organizations too, that are subject matter experts. They are leaders in this community, and I am often kicking things to them too, even though they're not in a specific position like mine. They might be in our taxation department. I just sent somebody to our taxation department. I have somebody in the medical examiner's office who now we have a connection to be able to work whenever they're working on in a case that they're investigating. I think about, you mentioned USDA. not only do they have a tribally specific program, they also have tribal leaders that are not within that department. And I think that's something that's often overlooked too, is the expertise that are embedded within departments that are not tribally specific. And that's an important note for me. I think about Rudy Soto. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of USDA. He's not housed within tribal affairs. But no one really realizes that. And he's from my tribe. He's my relative. And so he's actually like my second cousin, and we talk often. And so utilizing those relationships in different places too, even if it's not within a tribally specific office. My position is tribal specific. So I see it as my role. I knew when I accepted this job that I would be having to block other Native people within the organization from having to do a lot of that emotional labor, a lot of that work that they shouldn't have to, because they're not paid to do it. They might be paid just to process taxes. They might be paid. We have somebody in our library system, and she's like, I'm exhausted. I get asked every day to do all of these things during Native American Heritage Month, and I just want to be an Indian in November. And we laughed together over her saying that. She's like, I just want to be an Indian in November. And I said, listen, I got this. Send them to me, because I was hired to do that. And so I think leaning on the folks who have the expertise outside of even these positions that are specific is really what keeps these roles embedded within organizations, for sure.
Well, thank you for that. And you mentioned your emphasis on institutional policy change. And that really resonated with me, because AAUW is so much keys in on that, and especially at the national level and with our lobbying efforts. With the electeds. I haven't heard that term you use, the electeds. I'm going to use it. Fellow branch members, do you have any questions before we move on?
Joyce posted one in chat. Would you like me to read it?
Yes,
Rudy was the student body
Well,
president. Sorry, I just got that.
Yeah.
Pat Squire said that Rudy Soto was student body president at Portland State University.
Yeah.
And Pat would know that, having been affiliated with Portland State University. Joyce said, in Salem, the Climate Change Action Committee included Native Americans during their proceedings and decision-making. Do you know Native Americans are included in other city climate action committees?
They are. I think that's a great question. They are in some spaces. I think it really depends on the organization and their values and their ability to really issue, spot, and recognize when policy decisions overlap with tribal communities and their priorities too. I think people often think Native communities, will only have a certain stance on an issue, and they are often surprised. So even environmental issues, and they're also really leaning towards it depends on the tribe, it really leaning towards public safety issues. And I'm working on some housing issues with Grand Ronde right now. I'm working on some public health issues with Umatilla right now. I'm working on some water estuary and fish habitat restoration projects with Warm Springs and with Yakima and Purse and others. And so it really just shifts with any tribal government. But I do know that there has been, at least for Multnomah County, I will say there has been a huge effort. And again, speaking to Native leaders who aren't in specific jobs like this, but who are Indian leaders leading policy decisions within large institutions like Multnomah County, our director of the Office of Community Involvement, he's a Navajo man. His name is J.R. Lilly. I've known him for many, many years. And he's the director of this entire office at Multnomah County. He oversees a large budget, and he oversees almost all, I would say at least 80% of the appointments to all of our advisory bodies within Multnomah County. I believe there are 32, and that's budget, that's environmental issues, that's community involvement in general, how the county conducts that. It's things like noise control around the airport. We have so many bike and pedestrian, there's so many advisory committees, and the board does take their input very seriously. And I think having somebody in that position is so critical. It's not tribal specific position like mine, but somebody with that lens to be able to say, okay, I have relationships and connections within the urban Native communities and within tribal government communities as well. I'm going to blast this out into community, and I'm going to really like do one-on-one interviews to make sure that folks have a strong understanding of the mission of the work of the committee, so that they can come on board and engage in those spaces comfortably, and that it's a space for them that is welcoming. So I think that, you know, for Multnomah County, yes, we take that very seriously. Even the committee that recommended we rename the Sauvie Island Bridge, there's only one Native member on that 12-person committee, and the committee listened to him. And he said, I would like to bring this to the full group to discuss about re-indigenizing and decolonizing our waterways and our food sources. And they heard him, and they said, yes, we want to elevate this in our recommendation letter to the Board of County Commissioners. And so I think we're seeing that more and more over the years, and I think we're going to continue to see that grow. I know that I won't name the individual, but tomorrow is the first day for Governor Tina Kotek's new Tribal Affairs Director position. So that individual will be starting tomorrow. I'm not sure when that announcement will come out. I have a strong relationship with that individual. I'm very excited, and that she is in that role. I will share that it is a tribal woman from a tribe in Oregon, and I think it's a great fit, and I'm very excited. And we have a strong connection, and you know, the last text I received from her was, I'm ready to do some work with you. And I'm looking forward to that. And we know each other just from working on some federal work together. So Indian country is small. We all know each other. And when those things open up, like a climate action committee position or other things at a state, a local, a federal level, we are cognizant and thoughtful of who we can put in those positions or who we're going to ask to engage in those positions. But the community can be pretty strategic, especially tribal governments, in making sure that the right folks are where they need to be to advise on issues. And I think we see a lot of things. The state has a advisory committee on what is it called? The RTAC, the Regional Advisory Committee on Tolling, or the Regional Tolling Advisory Committee. There it is. The RTAC, the state of Oregon has 2 tribes. They've held 2 seats on that committee for tribes, Cowlitz and Grand Ronde. They both serve in that space, because you have to also think about those tribal implications that many governments don't. Is, tolling. We're going to implement tolling. Well, there are tribal implications and treaty implications that you have to think about. You're now introducing an additional barrier for tribal communities to accessing their traditional homelands, their ancestral homelands, their usual and accustomed hunting and gathering lands that they were afforded in treaties. So you have to think about the potential repercussions of putting a policy in place and not including tribal governments, because that gives them legal grounds to also come after you. And that's the only lever they have to pull, because you don't invite them to the table. And when you do invite them to the table and you do build those relationships with tribal governments, that legal lever is likely to be pulled less and less. And I think that is a benefit to everybody.
Thank you, Anna. Did somebody else have a question?
Pat has a question.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much, Anna. This is really interesting. I lived in Multnomah County for some time, so I fully understand your position on the eastern part of the state. Sometimes I've also lived on a reservation, which was a fascinating experience. I want to tell you about an incident that has happened here, and my question will be, do you know of anything similar that's happening elsewhere? I live in Clatsop County. Mm-hmm. In Seaside, and there was a beautiful piece of property right on the estuary where the river met the ocean, that was owned by a man from Texas who was building beautiful condos there. Mm-hmm. And somehow or another he was persuaded, he'd never seen the property, but he was persuaded to come and look at it, and immediately donated it to the local land conservancy, who held it for a number of years, and then came more and more to the realization that this was a village and ceremonial area for the Clatsop and Nehalem people. Mm-hmm. And so they have donated it back to the tribe. Do you know of other partnerships that are are operating like that around the state?
I do. There are many, and I think there are also a lot of allies that I have built relationships with that give me a heads up whenever something's happening. And so, for example, locally, the city of Troutdale is actually currently engaged in a discussion with, and this is where politics come into play, right? So the city of Troutdale owns a small island at the mouth of the Sandy River, which is right where near I live. I walk to the Sandy River often. And it's right at the like where where Sandy River meets the Columbia. We all know the Willamette Falls is very a hot topic with tribes, as is the Columbia River. Several tribes have treaty rights to Columbia River, and including my tribe. And they own some land on a smaller island, and that's a really significant spot. And I think without knowing, they started engaging. Well, we will engage the one tribe that we know, Grand Ronde, and we will give the land to them. We will engage in whether it be a co-management agreement, whether it be us completely giving them, signing them over the land, engaging in the intergovernmental agreement, MOU, whatever that policy vehicle is, we want to give it to Grand Ronde. And when I heard that, like my policy ears started going up, because I was like, oh no, you're going to create chaos in Indian country, because you're talking about the Columbia River, where you have four tribes who have very strong established treaty rights to the Columbia River, who currently have, one of them at least has a co-management agreement with the federal government with the Columbia River. They co-manage in terms they have police officers on their boats, policing tribal fishermen on the Columbia River. And you're going to give one tribe who politically, many people argue, don't have treaty rights to the Columbia River itself. Due to termination, their treaty rights were not restored. Their hunting, fishing, and gathering rights were not restored when they were restored in the 80s. They were terminated in the 50s. They were restored in the 80s. And so that's a challenge. And I think you have a local government that wants to do the right thing, that wants to engage in the land back effort, that wants to really do the right thing. And I was like, I agree with everything you're doing. However, I think you have to recognize you're dealing with populations that are rooted in a scarcity mentality due to the federal government, due to colonization, due to all of these intentional erasure acts. They're all scared that it's happening all again, and that you giving it to another tribe means they have less access now too. So then that's when that legal lever gets pulled, right? So you have to really think about all the politics that go into that. And it's beautiful work. It's also the hardest work. This is the hardest work I've ever done. It's also the most meaningful work that I've ever done. But I think about those instances where it's not as clear, where I think over where you're talking about in Seaside, that's much more clear, because I think the treaty rights there, very clear. Here, very murky. And so they are happening, and I think it's great. And I encourage it to continue to happen, because I think we also have seen, especially along the Columbia River, I can't remember the exact name of the town or the area, but on the Oregon side, so the Army Corps would manage this section of the river. And on the Oregon side, you would look at it and you would say, and you would gasp, there's no foliage, there's no trees, there's garbage everywhere. It's really unkept. And then you look over at the Washington side and it's flourishing and it's beautiful and there's trees and there's no garbage. That the Washington side is co-managed by a tribe. So the Army Corps said, we'll engage in a contract with you. You manage that side of the riverbank. And they had restored it. And they had put in traditional plants. They had brought back Wapato. They had brought back so many things that had been gone for so long. And they restored fish habitat. And they changed the structure of like even bridges. It's like, oh, the fish like grooves. And they knew all this. And they said, so we're not just going to put in slabs of concrete. We're going to put in grooved concrete within these bridges and small walkways, because we know that that's good for fish habitat. On the Oregon side, we were not doing well, and we're still not doing well in that area. And so I think that's a really good example of the beauty that comes out of doing something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And for those of you who are watching the clock, I'm watching the clock too. Anna, thank you. Thank you for the information, making us aware of the vital work you're doing, making a difference, and giving us the potential for helping make a difference. I have a couple of more things that I'd like to end with.
Can I just make a comment? There is another
Sure.
posting in the chat. And from Joyce. Rita, who's a member of the Albany branch, and her husband are donating their large rural property to a tribe. Their large rural property is outside of Dallas, to a tribe who I believe originally occupied that land. They are currently in the process of donation.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
I hope you
People
share with
making
them.
a difference.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
People making a difference. And Anna, did I read that university tuition is free for Native American students? I think I read that recently here in Oregon.
There's a lot of red tape. It's only if you fit within a very narrow box.
Okay, yeah. And that's an issue we're going to have to work on, isn't it? Okay, well, a couple things before we have the final close. Just some of you are aware of this, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. I hope you've all seen the AAUW Washington update. It's an electronic publication from our national office. And in the content of the publication, we are reminded that Native American women have one of the largest wage gaps in the country, earning only 55 cents per dollar paid to the average white man. And also from our national office, you are invited to join AAUW on November 30th at 11 o'clock a.m. Pacific time for a social media storm for Native Women's Equal Pay Day. That's November 30th, 11 o'clock our time. And I hope you'll join me in participating. You can get more information at hashtag Native Women's Equal Pay. That's hashtag Native Women's Equal Pay. So we're in this with you, Anna, and we hope that we can do as much or try to do as much as you are in making a difference. We're with you. And we really appreciate the information you gave us this evening. Georgia, I think we're back to you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for so much interesting information. It made me think about wondering what's going on with tribal affairs here in Southern Oregon. And of course, with Northern California, I'm familiar with the Siskiyou area. In any case, I wanted to remind members, thanks to Randa's timely branch buzz today, that we're starting a campaign to garner donations for Nick Whistle. We have about $1,000 in our Nick Whistle fund, and we're going to need about another $800 in order to send a student to Nick Whistle 2024 this coming spring. So please go to our website. Randa did a terrific job on our branch website, Oregon Online website, and she's provided a link where you can go directly to the Special Projects Fund, where you can donate directly to using your credit card online. There's an address where you could send a check if you prefer. So please encourage your friends and other members to donate to our Nick Whistle Fund so we can send another person to Nick Whistle. Also,
Georgia, can you remind us
yes?
what Nick Whistle stands for?
Oh yeah, let's see. I forget.
National Conference for College Women Student Leaders.
Thank you. And that was our first program in September, and I was hugely impressed by the young women that we sent and the impact that Nick Whistle made on them, even to the point of their changing their career plans, changing their educational plans. I was especially impressed by I think it was Elishiba who said, oh, I was just going to go to community college. And after I was going here, I thought, no, I'll get my bachelor's degree and maybe even a master's degree. So boy, was I impressed. I also want to remind everyone to attend our Oregon Online Lounge on the 30th, the week after Thanksgiving. Normally it would be on Thanksgiving, but to heck with that, we're not going to do that. So on the 30th at 5:30, bring your drinking stuff and we'll just chat about anything. It's open agenda. Come talk about whatever you want to talk about. Is there anything else that anyone wants to say for the good of the order or not good
I'd
of
like
the
to
order?
say thanks again to Anna. That was really informative. You were just so comprehensive. There's so much going on and there's so much more to do. I have a friend who works for the National Indian Child Welfare Association. I'm sure that you have dealings with them, but there's just so much that we don't know that we all need to know. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all. I'm really honored to be here and I just appreciate making space.
And Anna, we even would welcome you to join our branch. Since you have the degree, join our branch and be part of this happy little group.
I appreciate that
Can see
invitation.
to it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for coming.
Speaking of branches and membership, is everybody aware of the website openaaw.org?
Yes.
Good.
And so we're bringing up for vote, and National's bringing up for a vote again, open membership. And we're going to see if we can pass a new bylaw to do away with the degree as a requirement for membership in our organization. Almost made it last time. Okay, bye everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.